Health and Safety Uncovered. This is the second installment that I've done of this. I did a previous one last year. If you attended that, great. Hopefully you found it very useful. I've changed up the scope of what I'm presenting today, so I put some new facts and fictions in. You can always refer back to the previous one I did last year. It's on our YouTube channel. So if you wanted to see that one, if you didn't have the privilege or joy to attend on that day, it's available online. So this is going to go through the common myths, things that people get confused with when it comes to compliance. A lot of misconceptions, inspectors, regulators, service engineers, other consultants, all sort of things that they may get incorrect or inconsistent. I want to try and just clarify that to make things a little bit transparent for you guys and easier to understand. So I've done quite a few webinars now for Agilio. I'm coming up to my 2-year anniversary with the company. So if you haven't seen any more webinars before, again, they are available on our YouTube channel. But this is a bit about myself. I have been in the dental industry for over 10 years now. I've specialized in health and safety for the dental sector. I started off being an assessor, so I used to go around the UK doing health and safety, disability and fire assessments for practices. I've worked for both corporates and external consultants as well, so I've got a good wide knowledge scope when it comes to dental compliance. But yeah, I'll leave it there for a little bit just so you can see. But that's me in a nutshell. I'm been in the industry, know a lot about it, and hopefully that will come across during this webinar. So as I mentioned, we're going to go through some of the common inconsistencies in compliance. So these are a couple of things I'm going to touch on today. We're going to look at COSHH. This comes up quite a lot. It's one of those topics that has been raised throughout my career in dental. So I'm going to cover some of that. I'm going to cover as well disability, access audits, why you need to do them, the benefit of them. I'm going to go through a few examples of what a reasonable adjustment is. We're going to look at radiation as well, going over the different terminologies that are used in the dental sector, just to clarify exactly what they are and what they relate to. Electrical testing, so I'm going to touch on that. We're going to look at an electrical report and identify exactly how you interpret that report and what you need to do with it. And the only slide that I have kept in here from my one last year is extension leads. That went down really well. A lot of people gave positive feedback on it. So I've kept that one in from last year's presentation, just to give you a bit of a refresher if you were on that presentation. If you weren't, then you get an opportunity now to see it. But the whole scope of how to use extension leads in a practice. So those are all things I'm going to be covering, and we'll go through now. I'll be answering any questions at the end of this presentation. I want to get through it within our lunch break to enable yourselves, if you need to rush back off to surgery or back into practice, to do that. So any questions I'll be answering at the very end of the presentation. So just to clarify a few points before I go into the content, there are a couple of things I'm going to be covering. There's the framework of your regulatory requirements. So you've got acts, orders and regulations. These are things that are required, and if you don't follow them, you will be found to be in breach of your statutory responsibilities. So these icons are going to be referenced throughout the presentation, so you can see what is actual law and what is guidance. Approved codes of practice, they're a health and safety document. They have special legal status. They give very, very good descriptions of what you need to do to comply with a law. But if you're found not to follow them, the court could find you in breach of that ACOP unless you can demonstrate that you've complied with it in some other way, and that other way is as good or not, if not better. And then you've got guidance documents such as your HTMs, British standards. So these are not legally binding documents, but they provide guidance to help you comply with the law. So if you follow the guidance, you will be doing enough to comply. But you are free to choose other directions and go other ways. But you need to demonstrate, again, if something went wrong, how you've complied with that fundamental law and obligation that you've got. Otherwise, the court will find you at fault. So following guidance is a very, very good way of knowing that you're doing everything right. And the guidance documents such as HTMs, as we know from a healthcare regulatory perspective, they use HTMs, they use or reference British standards, and other guidance documents are out there. So they use them as a benchmark, and it's up to yourselves then to either follow them and do what they tell you, or to demonstrate that you're doing something different, but it's as good. So that's just, in a nutshell, the framework behind the law and the different requirements. So as I said, you'll see icons throughout the slide to tell you which one is which. So we're going to look at COSHH first. So again, everything that I'm talking about now are common queries that get raised. They've been raised throughout my career in dentistry, things I'm very, very familiar with. And they're being raised internally as well through our helpline and through our eye managers as well. These are common queries that come back from our members. Some of these you may know the answer to, some you won't. So again, this presentation isn't about teaching you to suck eggs. It's just to give you a bit of verification, clarification, and assurance on what the requirements are around these topics. So the first thing that I'm going to answer is, do you need to risk assess every substance in your practice? So very, very common thing that comes through our helpline and eye managers. And the answer to that is no, you don't. You only need to assess substances that are deemed hazardous to health. Okay, so not every single substance requires a very detailed formal risk assessment process. So the law on this, so this comes from the Control of Substances Hazardous to Health Regulations, COSHH, and we should all be familiar with the term COSHH. And that states that an employer must not carry out work which is liable to expose employees to hazardous substances hazardous to health unless they have made a suitable and sufficient assessment. Okay, so the one bit that I want to clarify on this is the terminology around substances hazardous to health. How do we know what substance is hazardous? So again, within that law, within that framework, it does define this, and it states that a substance that is hazardous to health is one that has been classified under the CLP regulations. So again, what does that mean exactly? How do we break that down into our language? Well, essentially, that means these symbols. Any substance in a practice that has been labeled with one of these pictograms has been classified as hazardous to health. And those substances are the ones that require risk assessment. So essentially, if a substance hasn't got one of those symbols attached to the packaging, to the labeling, or to the safety data sheet that should accompany the substance, then essentially it hasn't been classified hazardous to health and therefore falls outside the scope of COSHH. So you don't necessarily have to go around assessing every single substance if it hasn't been classified as hazardous with one of those symbols. So how do we know whether a substance is hazardous then? So the packaging should have one of those symbols on it. Or as I briefly mentioned, you should have the safety data sheet with that substance. Now, safety data sheets have to be provided for every hazardous substance by law. They have to be provided by the manufacturer and they are widely available. So if you haven't got one with the substance, you can download them from the internet, free of charge, widely available. So all you have to do is type in the name of the substance, the brand, and you should be able to find it. A lot of manufacturers as well, if you're ordering your supplies through Dental Directory or other suppliers, they will accompany the product with the safety data sheet as a downloadable PDF. So when you're doing your order, you should be able to download those sheets as a reference point. So if the actual product hasn't got a symbol on it, don't just take that as it's not hazardous. Check the safety data sheet first, just for verification. So what you need to do when you get these data sheets is have a look at the relevant sections that I'm going to go through now. So section 1 tells you about the product, what it's intended for, how it's intended to be used, the general description of it. So the key section for you now is section 2. So this is the section that will determine or tell you whether that product has been classified as hazardous to health. And as you can see on this one I've got here, Febreze Air Mist, it's something I've just pulled off out of my bathroom, but it's been classified as not hazardous. So therefore, it doesn't need to go through a formal risk assessment process. It's not hazardous to health. It shouldn't cause any adverse health effects under normal use. And when I say normal use, that's key, because every product can be potentially hazardous if you abuse it. If I decided to take the lid off that and drink it in its full quantity, then obviously it's going to cause me harm. But when you do COSHH assessment, it's about being reasonable and practical with it. It's about looking at that product in its intended use, what it's for, how it's to be used. And under those normal circumstances, this data sheet is telling me this product is not deemed as hazardous to me. However, when it comes to safety data sheets, even though you don't need to formally assess this, you still need to keep these data sheets on hand for reference, because they still got lots of useful information in it. So even though it's not telling me that it's going to cause me any serious health effects if I use it, if I swallow it, inhale it, anything like that, it's not going to cause me really bad problems. There's still information in here to tell me what I need to do if I do need to get it on my skin or things like that. So you should always keep these data sheets, regardless of whether the product is hazardous or not, as a reference point for all your staff. So if someone did accidentally swallow some of this, they could refer to section 4 and it tells them what to do. So the advice is that any product that has been identified as hazardous, you go away, you do your formal risk assessment, you put your control measures in place, you train your staff on those controls, you tell them how to use that product to avoid harm to themselves. Any product that hasn't been classified as hazardous, you keep the data sheet as a reference point for your team members. You still may want to consider some of the information that's in these data sheets, even if it hasn't been classified as hazardous. In particular, the safety phrases. So as you can see at the top of that, I've highlighted S2, and that tells me to keep out of reach of children. So again, this is where people get confused with it, because they see these safety phrases and they see information like this and think, oh, okay, I need to go away and formally assess that. The reason for these is, like I said, every product, if it's abused, can cause harm. And if you're dealing with children, vulnerable adults, and they've got access to these products, if you're leaving these in the toilets, in the bathrooms where they've got access, then you don't know what their intentions are going to be with that product. So there's still information in these sheets that is relevant for you to take on board to know what you need to do with them. And that's telling me essentially that even though it's not hazardous, you should really keep it out of reach of children, because they could do a lot of extra things with that product from outside its normal scope of purpose and what it's intended to be used for. So when it comes to collating a COSHH file, you should essentially RAG rate all your products. Your red are your high risk products that you risk assess. You've got an orange for your medium risk products and your green for your low risk products. All those need risk assessment. All those products are classified as hazardous. But then you would have a section in your COSHH folder then, and you possibly label that as non-hazardous or not classified as hazardous. And you just simply file away all these relevant data sheets into that section. That means you still looked at it. That shows to inspectors that you've assessed it in an informal way. And you've gone, okay, this is non-hazardous, but here's the information in my folder for staff members to refer to if they've got concerns or they want particular information about it. So you can really tailor your management of COSHH down by being particular on the products you choose in practice. Simple things like biro pens, Tipp-Ex, things like that. There's a lot of eco-friendly versions of those products. I'm going to use Tipp-Ex as an example because it's a good one. Your blue bottle Tipp-Ex is classed as an irritant, if I remember correctly. So that would fall under COSHH. You need to assess it. However, you can get eco-friendly Tipp-Ex, which is a green bottle, which is not classified as hazardous. So if I was in practice, I'd be swapping that around to ensure that I don't have to go through that formal process and to simplify the management of COSHH for me. So you can always look at the products you buy and try and change your ordering around to get products that are less harmful or not classified as hazardous. And that will reduce the workload that you guys have to do when it comes to managing COSHH in practice. Just as a reference, it's not on this safety data sheet because it's not hazardous, but the other things to look for when you're going through the data sheet is R phrases. So these are your risks, and there's a couple of examples there. So anything with an R number on it is telling you what those particular risks are. So again, Non-hazardous products generally won't have those on the safety data sheet, whereas your hazardous products will have them in some form or another. So they'll tell you what the actual risks is, and that's the risks that you need to control when you're managing COSHH. So as in iComply, we've got two versions to manage COSHH to help you guys. So if you are a member of iComply, you've got your COSHH assessment document, which is M267B. But if you're not aware, we have got quite a lot of digital tools as well. And we're moving forward with this as well to digitalize a lot more in the software now to make things easier for you. So we have actually got a COSHH assessment record, a digital version to make the process of assessing your hazardous substances a lot easier. So these assessment tools are there to help you manage the process of COSHH and to reduce the workload and time you're spending on it as much as possible. We've also got, obviously, our iManage function as well. So if you're not a member of iManage, that is where a dedicated person and a dedicated expert within that team will look after your account, and they will have regular team meetings with you and your staff. They will review your documents. They will help you implement them in practice. And they will then go through either the COSHH assessment or the digital tool with you, help you fill it out, and make sure that all that information is accurate. So it's more of a hand-holding exercise to ensure that you're doing things correctly and that you feel confident that you're doing things in the right way as well. So 2 different ways to manage COSHH in the system for your reference. So the next topic I want to talk about is disability. So again, just to clarify, I am skirting over these in vague because that's the purpose of today. I'm not going to go in-depth information on each one. I could do a whole webinar on COSHH, but the intention of today is just to look at the fundamental top-level concerns that are coming out of our helpline and iManage feedback. So disability access, do you need to carry out one? So essentially, there is no statutory obligation to do a disability access audit. There's nothing in law that says you have to do one and it's legally required. However, the law, the Equality Act in particular, does put an obligation on all of us to make reasonable adjustments to ensure that disabled persons are not put at a disadvantage compared to non-disabled persons. So the purpose of a disability access audit is to help you comply with that statutory obligation. Is to help you identify where the reasonable adjustments could be made in your premises to ensure that you're not accidentally discriminating against your service users. So the definition of reasonable adjustment is something that you can do that is effective, practical, cost-effective. You're able to do it in the premises, taking in consideration your resources and size, and using support that's out there. There's a lot of government schemes that helps you implement things, or even gives you funding for improving accessibility for disabled persons. But reasonable works both ways. It works for us as the business, but it also works for the people using that service as well. For example, a wheelchair user wouldn't be able to demand that we install a lift into a practice if you haven't got the spatial restraints to even consider that. That would be an unreasonable request. But they would be able to suggest or suggest things like ramps, portable ramps, or better contrast in your practice if they're visually impaired and they're finding navigation around the building difficult. So reasonable works both ways. They have to be reasonable in the requests or what they want to help the service, but you have to be reasonable as well in what you implement to help them. So it is all based around what you can do, what your premises, what your building enables you to do. And some buildings are going to be more difficult than others. For example, a listed building will have a lot more restrictions on what you can do with it than a non-listed building. So again, there's maybe some requests to improve access in a listed building, but you may not be able to do it because you can't be granted approval from the council to do those adjustments. So again, you just have to think, what is it you can do around the resources and the ability, the practice that enables you to do those things. So I want to go through a few examples. Wheelchair users and steps. This is a very common thing. A lot of practices that I've been to in my experience has got steps to get in and out of the building. So obviously, if someone approaches your building in a wheelchair, they can't get in. So if you instantaneously said, well, we're not wheelchair friendly building, so we don't allow wheelchair users, that could be treated as direct discrimination because you're treating them less favorably. You haven't considered how you can help them. You haven't put in alternative suggestions or arrangements to ensure that they can be treated. So refusing access purely based on their wheelchair use could be seen as direct discrimination. So what is it that you could do to get around that problem? So you could consider a ramped access, and there's lots of different variations of ramped access that you can consider. So there's no one size fits all. You could consider a fixed ramp, which is the top picture. So if you've got the space to do that, if you've got a large forecourt, you've got the grounds, you've got the resources, then you can put plans in place to build a fixed permanent ramp to help people. If you haven't got that ability, if you haven't got that ground, the money to do that initially, then an interim solution would be a portable ramp that you can purchase from numerous mobility suppliers online. You could also, if you've got an alternative exit into the premises. So I've been to practices where you've got steps at the front entrance, but they've got a back door which has got flush entry. So another option is to make that back entrance your designated accessible entrance for patients. And all you need to do there is improve signage, make it very clear that there's an alternative exit, put that on your website, put that on your patient information leaflets, and communicate it. If you haven't got any of this ability in practice, for example, if you're located on the first or second floor of a building and you can't get around the stairs and there's no lift, then you simply just put in referral arrangements. You identify a practice within the immediate area that has got level accessible entrance for mobility impaired patients, and you put an arrangement in place where you can refer them. The thing that you don't do is just go, sorry, we can't accommodate you, and leave it at that. You have to consider what you can do to refer them or accommodate them in your practice. But if you are going to consider ramped entrance, then there are certain caveats that you need to put in place or you need to comply with. And everything listed there, it comes from the building regulations. So this is, again, something the practices get wrong. They go, okay, we've got a couple of small steps, we'll just buy a portable ramp online. And they just buy any old ramp. That's not good enough in itself, because ramps are quite difficult to navigate if they're too steep. And especially disability access is all around promoting independence. So the last thing a person wants to do if they rock up to your practice in a wheelchair is then have to be shepherded into your practice by the nurses or receptionists. They want to feel that they can get in themselves, and they don't necessarily want or need any help to get in. So you need to consider the right tools to help them. And a portable ramp needs to be a sufficient gradient that's not too steep. So you can get various lengths of portable ramps, and that all depends on the height of the steps. So there's numerous calculators online that you can use to help you determine the length of ramp that you need so that it's appropriate for the people that are coming into your premises. If you're choosing to build or put in place a fixed ramp, a permanent ramp, then these are the other things that need to be considered. You need to consider the width of it, the contrast of the surface. So again, people need to be visually aware of the ramp before they approach it. If it's a really long ramp, you see ramps in buildings where they zigzag up. And if that's the case, they need to have suitable rest landings, because again, mobility impaired people may struggle with their capabilities to get a long, lengthy ramp. So they need to have certain areas where they can rest, catch their breath. So there's all these sort of factors that you need to think about when you're considering improving access into your building. And speaking to a suitable building contractor, a surveyor, will help you determine what solution is right for your particular practice. And these aren't all about putting these in place right now. This is about building a plan towards better access for your building. So you can speak with a surveyor, speak with your contractors, put the plans together, and then put that in motion then over the next year, 2 years, 3 years. The disability access audit is there to help you identify what you need to do, how to go about it, and then to enable you to put a plan in place to satisfy your inspectors that you're considering reasonable adjustments. So another example is stairs. So this is a picture in, I can't think where I took this picture from now. I can't remember if it was a hotel or a conference center. I can't remember which one it was. But these stairs would be no good. They'd be no good for mobility impaired patients, and they'd be no good for visually impaired patients. The carpet is terrible. It's very hard to actually see the steps. The handrails are not ideal either. So this wouldn't be suitable in a practice. And again, I've come across this quite a few times where practices have said, oh, well, we don't treat patients in the upstairs. If they've got mobility issues, we'll just treat them on the ground floor. That's not really suitable because, again, you're treating them less favorably than non-disabled people. Just because someone is visually impaired doesn't mean that they're blind. They just may lost sight in one eye, or they've got balance deficiencies, but they've still got use of their legs. We shouldn't be refusing them access to areas of the practice where they may want to go. So if you have got upstairs surgeries, we should do everything in our power to enable those people to access those surgeries and not confine them to just a certain area of the practice. So again, that could potentially be treated as direct discrimination if that's the case. So we have to look at what adjustments we can do to help them navigate the areas of the practice that they may want to. So again, stairs, same criteria. There's building regulations dictate what accessible stairs are, and these are the sort of things to consider. So this is an example of a good set of stairs, but again, you can tailor the color, you can tailor the design aspects of it to suit your parameters, to suit your aesthetics of your practice. So they don't have to be ugly disability stairs that you may be familiar or associate yourselves with blue plastic handles that you see in hospitals. They can be quite nice. They can be trendy. Chrome handles are absolutely fine. You can change the color of the carpet to suit your color theme for your practice. But the key things to do is to ensure that the stairs they've got good tread, that there is good color contrast between the steps and the surrounding walls. Same with the handrails. They need to contrast suitably to enable visually impaired people to be able to see them. So again, I see a lot of in clinical environments, handrails being white, walls being white, the carpet on the stairs being a very light grey. That all doesn't provide suitable contrast, so it makes them quite difficult to navigate. So again, just think outside the box, be a little bit creative with the design, but ensure that you're following those pointers there when you're considering. And again, it doesn't mean you have to do everything. You can pick and choose. You can go, okay, I haven't got the money at the moment to replace all of the carpet to fit tread. So I'm going to do it in a staged rollout. So I'm going to put on better handrails first to give them that support when they're going up and down. Then we'll replace the carpet. Then we'll do the decor. So again, you can be reasonable with this and do it in accordance to what your parameters allow you to do. And then the last one around disability is indirect discrimination. So this is where a policy or a particular rule you may have may put someone at a disadvantage. So for example, if you had a no dogs allowed policy in place, that would indirectly discriminate against those who are reliant on the support of guide dogs. So a reasonable adjustment around this sort of thing would be just to simply change your policy to allow assistance dogs into your practice. So I've expanded on this because it's not just guide dogs. Assistance dogs also cover other variations. So guide dogs are there to help you visually impaired. You've also got hearing dogs. You've got mobility dogs, which is the one you can see in the picture. So they will be trained to support mobility impaired patients by opening doors for them and to help them around the practice. You've got medical alert dogs as well. So again, if a patient is reliant on taking a particular drug or they suffer from seizures or fits, the medical alert dog will pick up on those signs and alert alert their handler and alert other people to it before that eventuality strikes. And you've got autism dogs as well there to provide comfort and help with people that suffer from that. So you've got different types of assistance dogs. So it's about expanding your policy and procedures to allow all those types in your practice. So again, these are all examples of reasonable adjustments, things you can consider to help you put things in place. And again, that is the purpose of the disability audit. Doing one of those will actively highlight in your premises what adjustments you could reasonably make to enhance the patient journey and to enhance the ability for them to access your premises and services. So again, just like COSHH, we have got two variations of this in the system. We've got the audit of disability access, which you can access in our cycle, but we have got a digital tool which has been designed to enhance and improve the ability to carry one out. So we've got the audit disability access. You don't have to do both. You can pick either one. It's up to you and your preference. But these have been designed purposely to help you identify where you can do improvements. And they've been designed on the back of the building regulations that I mentioned. So they've got specific measurements, diameters, excuse me, I can't get my words out today. But they have been designed specifically with the measurements in place, because it's not just about installing a handrail. There is certain criteria that you have to meet. It has to be so far away from the wall. It has to be a certain circumference. It has to be a certain height from the pitch of the steps. So again, all these sort of things need to be met, and they're governed for a reason, because they're designed around the people who tend to use them. So the disability access audit has to really identify those key specifics to help you put things in place. So again, if you are uncomfortable with this sort of thing, and if you're not quite got the knowledge behind it, use these tools. The guidance is there within them. So I just go back. As you can see here, there's lots of detail within the tools that tell you how to implement it. And again, our eye manager's there. So if you are a member, our eye manager's there to help you with this. They can run through it with you step by step. They can give you the information on it. They can review it once you've completed it to make sure that it's been done accurately. So they're really there to help support you and to guide you through the process to make sure that you feel comfortable and confident with it. So look, before I move on, I just want to touch on the iManage, because we have got a special offer at the moment on it. So if you're not a member of iManage and you want to know more about how our experts can help you implement, manage these sort of things, the COSHH, the disability, then a little pop-up will appear on your screen now. So feel free to drop us a call, click on the link, and you can inquire about more information around the iManage function and how it can help you implement these tools. So moving on, we've got radiation equipment testing. So these are terminologies that I have experienced throughout my life journey, and I keep hearing all the time. And I just want to provide some transparency on them. So a critical examination is something that we should all be familiar with. We should have heard about that. So exactly what is it, and how often do I need to do it? So essentially, a critical examination only needs to be done following the installation of a new X-ray generator. So I said generator is your intraoral X-ray equipment, your panoramic, or your CBCT. I didn't want to generalize that as X-ray equipment because it doesn't cover things like developer machines. So it's anything that generates the ionizing radiation. Okay, and you only need to do one at install. So a critical exam is there to ensure the safety features operated correctly, follow the install, and they will also identify the protection that's required to be in place to protect persons from exposure. So this is like your shielding arrangements for that room that your X-ray machine has been installed into. So the other element then, and the other terminology that I hear a lot of, is acceptance test, and then routine performance test, routine assessment, periodic inspection. Those are all terminologies that are floated around in the dental industry, but essentially all of those fall under the ionizing radiation regulations definition of performance testing. So an acceptance test, if you've heard of that before, that is a type of performance testing that's done before the X-ray generator is used for the first time. So you do the critical exam to ensure that all the safety features operate correctly. Then in conjunction with the critical exam, you do an acceptance test to make sure that that equipment is fit for clinical use before you put it into operation. So critical exam and acceptance test go hand in hand. But the acceptance test is a type of performance testing. So that is the formal definition. You also have to do a performance test then at regular intervals following installation. So again, this is your routine assessment. This is your periodic inspection. And some companies even refer to this as a critical examination. But it's not really. It's a performance test or a routine assessment is your ongoing inspection of that equipment following the date of inspection, which is usually done every 3 years for an intraoral and panoramic. So that's usually when your RPA comes in every 3 years, tests the equipment, makes sure that it's still operating as it was installed, that all the safety features are working correctly and the equipment is working correctly. So a routine assessment is another type of performance testing, but that's about the ongoing interval inspections. And then a performance test, again, is required when you do a maintenance procedure on the equipment that may have subjected it to variations that affect its performance. So usually you find this is required when you change rooms. So you may have relocated a dentist from one room to another, and you want to move that piece of equipment, that intraoral camera, from the old surgery into the new one. So when you do that, you don't necessarily need to do a critical examination again. You need to do a performance test to make sure that that process has been done properly and that the equipment is still fit for purpose. Okay. So to touch on this, there is something as well that practices do get wrong, and they do in the wrong sort of order. And this links into relocating equipment into a new room or installing a brand new piece of equipment into a current room. So before you do a critical examination, before you do an acceptance test in ensuring the equipment is fit for clinical use, you really need to consult with the RPA. You need to ensure that that room is being spec'd out appropriately. You need to ensure that room has been spec'd out appropriately for that use, for that purpose. So this is where it comes into looking at the walls, the door, if there's any windows in the room, to check if you need any additional lead lining, if you need to consider where to position the operator, the control panel, the isolation switch. And what generally happens is if you don't consult with the RPA before doing that install, the critical exam will pick up on all these things, but post-install. And what you may find yourself with then is you've installed the equipment into that room, and then your critical exam says that you need additional shielding for a particular wall. And doing that work then retrospectively is a lot more difficult, or can be a lot more difficult, than if you do it proactively. So if you speak with the RPA first and go, we're looking to install a brand new intraoral into this surgery. The current walls are brick, plasterboard, lead lined. You tell them the current scope of the room. You tell them the surrounding rooms as well. So next to this room is the patient waiting area. You give them the details of your anticipated workload and the type of X-ray equipment that's going in. They will then assess all those details, and they will come back to you then with a formal shielding specification. So they go, okay, before you install this X-ray piece of equipment, you need to lead line this particular wall. You need to ensure that the control panel is positioned here, and they will dictate where to position it. And you need to ensure that the operator stands in this area. So they will dictate all that. You can then give that formal advice to the installer, the contractor, and they will then follow it. So it's always a lot better to speak with your RPA first to make sure you got all that specification in place before you go ahead and install any equipment. That way, your critical exam will pick up on all those specifications and ensure that you're not left with anything that you have to retrospectively address after install, which may cause you problems because you want to use that equipment, but you can't until a lead line door has been fitted that was only picked up afterwards. So do things before, be proactive. Don't just install the equipment and then find yourself with unexpected actions that you need to do before you can start using it. So electrical testing, what is an EICR? So essentially, this is an electrical installation condition report, historically known as a 5-yearly fixed wire test. So you may still be familiar with that terminology, 5-yearly fixed wire, but it's called now an electrical installation condition report. And that's where someone comes into the practice, an electrician, and will test all the fixed services. So your sockets, your fuse panels, your lighting, all those sort of things. So it's completely separate to portable testing or your PAT testing. So is it legally required in itself? No, it's a little bit like the disability audit. There's no statutory obligation to do an EICR. There's nothing in law that says you have to do this. However, what the law does tell you to do is to ensure that you maintain all your electrical installations appropriately to prevent danger. So how do you evidence that you're maintaining an electrical installation? You evidence that by undertaking an EICR. Without an EICR, it's going to be very difficult for you to evidence to inspectors or to other regulators such as the HSE or local fire services if something does go wrong. So that is a key piece of evidence to ensure that you're complying with that obligation. So whilst there's no legal requirement to do an EICR in itself, without it, you're going to find it very hard to evidence compliance with your statutory duty of care that's shown. And the British standard BS 7671 is the relevant standard that talks about how to do an EICR, the frequency around it, how to conduct it. So that is the standard that all the contractors that undertake it will follow. So again, that's the guidance document that tells contractors what they need to do, how to go about it. So let's look at an EICR in detail. So again, you may be familiar with this. But again, I'm going to go through various details because these are some common queries we get on it. So this is a typical report that an EICR will look like. It will state at the top right corner that it's an electrical installation condition report. So if you get given an electrical report that doesn't state that, it's probably not an EICR, it's probably something else. So make sure you look at your electrical testing certificates and verify whether or not you've got one of these on file. So the first section is section 4. You need to familiarize yourself with this in your report because this section details the exact scope of the report, what it was that they tested when they came in and did it. And the reason I'm highlighting this is because you will find in some situations that that extent doesn't cover the entire installation. You may have had a recent extension to your premises and you dig out your EICR that was done before that extension, the scope won't cover the extension. So it will only say, for example, ground floor was only covered during this. It doesn't make any reference to the new build that you did. Or it may state that the ground floor was done as part of this inspection, but you've got a first and second floor as well. So you need to make sure the extent covers your entire installation. And if it doesn't, then you're missing key parts of that electrical installation, and therefore you need to get those tested as well. If the scope of the report does cover your entire installations, then you need to ensure that section 5 reads satisfactory. If it doesn't read satisfactory in the example shown, then that report is not suitable and it doesn't help you comply with your statutory duty of care to ensure that your electrical mains are safe. That is telling me that something's not quite right. So you need to make sure that you address the concerns to turn that unsatisfactory to a satisfactory. So again, just because you've got one doesn't mean that it results in your installation being appropriate. You need to make sure that you've addressed any unsatisfactory concerns or actions that are highlighted. And then section 6 details the time frame. So again, another common query we get is how often do these need to be undertaken? So for a commercial premises, in healthcare in particular, 5 years is the maximum recommended time frame. So you won't generally find anything that goes longer than 5 years for a commercial property. For a domestic property, it's 10 years, but commercial, it's 5. So if you have got an EICR that says 10 years, I'd question that with the contractors because they may be confusing it with a domestic setting rather than commercial. You can have it less than 5 years. So again, this is dictated by the contractor. If they feel that your electrical installation is really old, coming to the end of its lifespan, or it's likely to be quite problematic, then they could reduce that 5 years down. They could do it any period. It's down to them to make a justifiable case on that. But generally, you will find that it's 5 years in the majority. It's very rare that you'll see something less than that unless there is a particular concern that the contractor has. So how do we turn the unsatisfactory to satisfactory? Well, these are all the things that are highlighted on section 7. So this is your essentially action list that is part of the report. So this details everything that they've identified as part of that testing that they have got concerns about. And the classification code, which is in the right-hand column, dictates when or how serious those concerns are. So the categories are category 1, so C1, will result in an unsatisfactory EICR, and they are something that is potentially quite serious, so they need to be addressed immediately. The category 2s, so C2s, will again result in an unsatisfactory EICR. And again, those have the potential to cause harm, so they need to be addressed as soon as possible. FI is further investigation. So when they do an EICR, it's classed as a non-intrusive inspection. So they won't go digging into walls. They won't be ripping up floorboards. They won't be damaging any fixtures or fittings in place to identify things. So if there is a particular area of the practice that they can't trace the wiring back to, or they can't access because it's blocked, or they can't get into a surgery because it's been in use during the day, they will note that down as a further investigation. And again, that will result in an unsatisfactory report. So again, anything that is an FI should be dealt with without delay. It should be addressed with as soon as possible to ensure that there's no hidden concerns that they couldn't establish during this particular test. Now, on the other hand, there's a C3. So a C3 category 3 is a recommendation. So if you had an EICR that only had C3s listed, then that won't result in an unsatisfactory report. It will result in a satisfactory report, and it doesn't give you any obligations to actually do those. You have the freedom to do with them as you wish. You can leave them or you can address them. You don't have to deal with them. They're recommendations to get your electrical installation up to the newest standard, the newest British standards. But what that's telling inspectors that it complies with the current British standards that are in place. So your installation is safe as it stands, but it's recommended you do some work to get it up to the newest variation. But what may happen is if you don't work on those C3s, if the British standards change and the old current standards become obsolete and redundant, those C3s then may become a C2. So by addressing them and ensuring that your installation is always kept up to the newest British standards will ensure that you are always keeping it functional, keeping it safe, keeping it relevant. But you're not under any obligation to do them. So C3s only, you can keep them. It doesn't mean that you have an unsatisfactory installation. Anything else you have to address. So make sure if you're not familiar with an EICR or if you haven't got one in practice, dig one out, speak to your electrical contractor, have a quick scan of it and see if there's anything outstanding on it that you haven't addressed yet. If you are doing the work on them, you need to make sure you've got evidence that all that work has been done. So if the work is done by the same contractor that did the original EICR, they will provide you or should provide you with a new EICR that changes the unsatisfactory to a satisfactory. But if you outsource the work to a completely different electrical contractor, they won't give you a new EICR, but what you need to get from them is evidence that shows clearly that all those concerns that are raised on the report have been addressed. So they should provide you with a minor electrical installation certificate. The details on it, work done in conjunction with the EICR, points 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on page 7 have been addressed. So it should be very, very clear of what they've done to address those concerns. If there's any vagueness, it doesn't quite tell that story, you need to get them to verify that they've addressed everything. So you got that assurance to show to inspectors or anyone else that it's all been done. So lastly, just to go through this. So this was a slide that I did last year, but I've put it in here again because people found it quite useful. So extension leads, can they be used in practice? Yes, they can. There is no law or guidance that restricts their use. The key is that you manage extension leads properly. So obviously, don't leave the cables trailing across the floor so people could potentially trip over them. Don't put them under doors. So if the doors are opening and closing on the lead, it's going to wear and tear and potentially rip the protective rubber from the wire. So it's all about common sense. If you got them, use them properly, manage them effectively. And one of the keys here is to manage the overload. So extension leads have a maximum output of 13 amps. Some have a lower output of 10 amps. And you can check that by looking at the back of the extension lead. It will have inscribed on the back of it the maximum load capacity. So every appliance that you plug into that shouldn't exceed that maximum load capacity. So different appliances in your practice have different capacities. The examples here are your low risk appliances, your laptop, chargers, printers. They have all less than 0.5 amps, or in the case of a fridge, 1.5. You've then got your medium risk appliances, so your computer towers, your microwaves, heaters, toasters, vacuums. And then you've got your high risk appliances, so washing machines, tumble dryers, irons, kettles, autoclaves. So what you need to ensure that you do is you plug things in and you never exceed the maximum 13 amps. So as an example, I'm working in reception. I've got a four output extension lead, and I plug in my computer tower, a phone charger, printer, and monitor. And you can see here that is just over 3.25 amps. So I'm nowhere near exceeding the maximum load. So that is a safe use of extension lead. However, if I took the phone charger out and plugged in my vacuum to do a little bit of hoovering, I'm still safe, but you can now see that I'm nearly maxed out that extension lead. So as an example, if I now took out my printer and put in a portable heater, I am going to overload that extension lead. And that is the risk right there. Is once you overload it, that can result in electrical hazards such as fire, electrocution. So you need to make sure you always stay under that 13 amp threshold. And where practices go wrong, and I've seen this loads of times, they don't realize that your smaller appliances like kettles and toasters actually will max out an extension lead on its own. So if I just plug in a single kettle into a 4-socket extension lead, I've maxed that out. So if I plug anything else into that extension lead now, such as a phone charger, I'm overloading it and presenting a potential risk. So there's nothing wrong with using extension leads, but you have to manage them appropriately. And the load is one of the key components. So ensure that your staff are familiar with the different appliances, the different combinations, and what would be a safe combination and what would be a risk combination. If I plugged in a kettle, a iron, and an autoclave into an extension lead, that is definitely going to cause some problems. So just manage this effectively. So in summary, you must carry out a risk assessment for substances, but only those classified as hazardous to health. For all other substances, keep the safety data sheet on hand as a reference tool. Disability access are not required by law, but they will help you considerable reasonable adjustments to comply with the Equality Act. Critical examinations are required when you install the new X-ray equipment, and then you require a performance test before you use that X-ray equipment, and generally 3 years after the installation date. An EICR will help you evidence that your electrical mains are safe in accordance with your statutory duty of care. But ensure that your EICR is satisfactory. If it's detailed as unsatisfactory, ensure that you've got suitable evidence in place to show to inspectors that all those actions highlighted have been addressed. And then extension leads are absolutely fine to use in practice, but make sure you're using them effectively. Make sure that they're not, as I said, being mistreated and they're not being overloaded in any way. Okay. So again, I'm just going to put that pop up on screen again for the iManage support that we've got, because again, All of this is available in iComply, and the iManager's there to help you understand all this a little bit better. Okay, that help you to give that assurances or to answer any questions you've got. They're there to hold your hand. They're there to review your documents, to review any risk assessments you're doing, to ensure that this has all been done effectively. So if you want any help with this, if you've got any further questions that I've not covered on here, and you're already a member of iComply or iManage, reach out to us, ask those questions. If you're not a member and you want to know how we can help, then feel free to click the link and inquire about how we can support your needs. So that's it for the presentation today. I do apologize, my words I was getting my words a little bit confuddled during the presentation today, so apologies for that. But I'm happy now to go through the questions and answers and to try and pick up on or answer anything that you've put in. So thank you for your time, and I'll go through the Q&As now for you. So let's have a look. Right, so is EICR mandatory? So no. If we look at it as a particular requirement, it doesn't state in law that an EICR is mandatory, but the law dictates that you have to maintain your electrical installation safe. So without an EICR, you're going to find it very difficult to show compliance with that statutory obligation. So it's in your best interest that you do an EICR to help you fulfill that statutory obligation.